Uh,
Yeah.
yeah. All right. So it's streaming.
You always like me to move my thing over here towards you.
Well, I just like it wherever we can look at each other. Yeah. It's funny, it gets stuck. The little suction cups under it get stuck, huh? All right. So my videos. Patreoners, we will be right with you.
Is it recording?
It's streaming, but I'm trying to get shareable link.
So there could be somebody live who's just watching.
Just so Patreon knows they can join us. Here. Here. Let's see. It should be.
So there could be somebody live who's just watching.
Babe, this is just so wonderful.
What's that?
That we don't have to. Book club. Like record audio and video separate.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I guess it's fine that it's up here. I'm just move this here.
That's what I did. Just move it out the way.
Yeah. Okay. I think we're ready.
We ready? Is it recording on here?
Well, this is kind of recording in here. It's just more of a backup.
Yeah. Back up.
Oh, let me grab a picture. I forgot to do this last time.
Picture of what?
Well, we don't actually need a picture. Actually, I do want a picture. You want to take it this way? One more? Okay. Great. Let's do it.
You ready?
I think so.
Cool.
Let me get situated. I'm excited about this.
Think it'll be good?
Heck yeah. You want to lead us again? I think you did a good job.
Think I do?
Mm-hmm.
Well.
Deception.
We're back. We're back at it. Discussing the book by Howard Thurman, Jesus and the Disinherited, written around the 1940s, and us reading it in 2022. And it's still relevant.
Wow.
Yeah.
1940s when it was written?
Yeah, I want to say it was around there. That was after his trip to India. And that's kind of what led him to write this book, was his experience there and approach there.
Makes me want to travel.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Gives you a whole new perspective.
Yeah.
My name, though, is Kendall Dooley. I'm the husband to this beautiful creature over here.
Hello. And I'm the wife to this beautiful man.
Oh, thanks, babe.
You're welcome.
And we have been discussing Jesus and the Disinherited. We're currently on chapter 3, which is Deception.
Tres.
What do you think of the book overall so far? We read the first 2 chapters, which was Jesus, an interpretation of Jesus, kind of setting up the background of this book of like, what is the religion of Jesus?
Yeah.
And then what is the 3 things that kind of, that are kind of at the foot of the disinherited.
Yeah.
Of those who are, and when I say disinherited and how he says it, again, is the marginalized, the oppressed in society. So these 3 things he mentions: fear, hypocrisy or deception, and hatred. The 3 things that kind of bite the ankles, he says, of the disinherited. So what do you think of all that so far when we just read on fear and then the background of all in chapter 1?
Yeah, I think... Oh, you mean chapter 3? What we're on, or chapter 1?
Just what do you think of the book? How has it been so far? Yeah.
It's been really... It's given me a lot of language, which I was just telling Emma, who's on our Patreon, hi Emma, who I just had coffee with, that I have this desire to further my education in some form, in figuring out what capacity or what type of space I want to be in, only because I want to have better language. around what I'm about. And reading books like this is really helpful, but being able to do it with other people, I think would be a really cool experience. And that is essentially my answer to your question, because I feel like this book has given me a lot of language.
Yeah.
And as quite honestly, because it's so academic, it's such an academic read, it's inspired me to want to be in that world a little more, to where I could read it without having to read it 5 or 6 times. Although I also think that might even just be how I learn, that it is sometimes difficult for me to grasp what he's saying. But I feel like if I exercise that muscle more, I'll be able to more quickly translate it to 3-year-olds, which is kind of like the culture of what I feel like is right now. And people communicate on a 3-year-old level, not to like diss our culture, but just because of the way everything is so easily accessible. In order to be influential with people and impactful, I do think we have to be a bit more accessible to people. Yeah. And so that's what this book has been doing for me. It's been liberating me on a new level. Yeah. And I've really enjoyed reading it with you and then having these discussions with you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a good reminder that this is Howard Thurman that we're reading, who's a pretty deep philosopher. And has just a lot of language. Like this is stuff people who are studying their doctorate or PhD read books like this. And so it's just a good reminder of like, even I, who I probably consider myself well read, I'm currently in a master's program in seminary.
I would consider you that too.
And I still feel like a kid in a playground reading this book. And in my own writing, I'm like, oh my goodness, the stuff he says and where he's going is like, what? With this. And so, I don't think discredit your thoughts on it, because I think it's Howard Thurman. It's a challenge. Any Howard Thurman book is a big challenge to read. Yeah. But I think people like Howard Thurman, what makes Howard Thurman significant and cool is that he was really influential for the activists, right, during his time, that he helped give the language. He helped allow people to think and process through stuff through his wisdom and putting things out there, where he wasn't necessarily the one on the ground like Martin Luther King. He wasn't the one doing the protests, organizing and doing all that stuff. He was more of just offering thoughts, and was kind of like allowed people to have a strong why behind what it is they were doing, which came from his academic knowledge. And so that's not everybody's calling, is to be in the academic space, and is to be that. Like, I know you talk about books that you've read. I like Soong-Chan Rah, Mark Charles' book that was kind of big and forming for you.
Yeah, Unsettling Truths.
Yeah, and it's like we just need people like that who are like writing the books or saying the stuff that then forms people to then be activists and go be about it. Yeah. And I feel like I view you probably more as activists than that type of space. But it's good too to be balanced in all things.
Yeah, and I am also, even as you say that, realizing how all of it works together. There's people in the academic space, there's people that are boots on the ground, but as like being in a position of a pastor where you're responsible for the spiritual formation of people, it's like I want to repeat and say things like this. I want to be formed by Howard Thurman, right, in this book, and then I want to form the people I'm discipling in this thought process, so that because we are a church community, we are people that gather together on a Sunday, but then go into our worlds. And I want us to do based upon this type of thought process and this type of philosophy and theology and things like that. And so it's all so connected. So like my hat's off to the Dr. Shaniqua Walker Barnes of the world and the Howard Thurmans of the world, you know, and the Soong-Chan Rahs and the Mark Charles of the world, whose books I've been influenced by, because they are what keep us going. The people that are doing the thing is like, we need strong foundational groundwork by people who have language to give us, so that when we do, we have language for what we're doing and the strong why, like you're talking about. So yeah.
But Howard Thurman, he's even like, I'd say even more unique than even probably people we have currently who are reading books during our time. This book at least, I mean, I've read some parts of other stuff he's written, but this book at least kind of reminds me like of the wisdom literature in the Bible, and specifically like Ecclesiastes, where like Ecclesiastes in the Bible, it kind of, there's different parts in the Bible in the wisdom literature, say Proverbs, where it's kind of like equation, where it's like if this, then this. Like if you're good to people, then good will come back to you, right? And kind of you'll reap what you sow type of language is in Proverbs. But then Ecclesiastes kind of goes like, no, that's not always the case, because there's good people who die young. And he kind of like has in Ecclesiastes, the writer in Ecclesiastes, doesn't really have any specific points they're saying. They're just kind of processing almost out loud and writing it on paper. Yeah. Because like the beginning of Ecclesiastes, he's saying like everything's meaningless. But then kind of goes on to say like, but there's a lot of good in eating with one another and drinking with one another and sitting at a table is joy there. And he says that in Ecclesiastes and kind of goes back and forth in these processes and these thinkings. Yeah. And he does get to some resolutions where he says, like the beginning of the Lord or the beginning of wisdom is fear of the Lord. So he does make some of these definitive statements throughout, but it's like you wouldn't really see what the person's about in the middle of the book. Yeah. Because you're like, wait, he's processing this stuff and this and that. Yeah. But it's like later towards the end, he kind of wraps everything up and kind of says what he's a little bit more thinking and trying to say, but still a little bit like if you catch it in the middle of his journey, you're like, whoa, what's going on? Yeah. Rather than the end. And I feel like Howard Thurman is like that. Yeah. And even in this chapter in Deception, chapter 3 that we just read, you kind of read it and he's saying these different things around deception. And you're like, okay, so is this good or is it a bad thing? But he kind of like doesn't answer that, but then just wraps and makes some definite statement at the end. Yeah. When talking about deception. So, I'm excited to talk about it in this podcast.
Well, why don't you start off by just saying, move us through chapter 3 and maybe some of the things, because I know you have a really good thought that kind of summarizes chapter 3, which he talks about at the end of chapter 3, which I know we'll get there. But maybe just some thoughts you have having read it, like more of his thoughts, maybe recapping towards the beginning as he moves throughout the chapter.
Yeah, so he introduces deception by what he means by it, kind of saying that those who are weak, and when it comes to relationships, those who are weak in relation with those who are strong kind of operate in a way of deceiving the strong in order to survive and flourish. And he uses it and talking about in the animal kingdom. First, where he gives examples of like the fish. It was like a cuttlefish or something. Yeah. That like points out ink to like confuse its enemy and deceive its enemy, and then he gets out of there. The cuttlefish gets out of there, and then he used a couple other examples talking about how birds will do the same. Birds will kind of like trick their prey, right, to think that they're dead or to think that they're wounded so they won't get eaten. Yeah. Right. And so they kind of deceive the strong and the powerful in order to survive. And then he brings it to human beings. And talking about examples of like children would do this, right, with their parents, right? They'll try to deceive their parents to get what they want or what they're after. And then he does it with a student and teacher relationship too. Yeah. And then he goes down and brings it more seriously and saying that's like the woman and man relationship too in our society, in a society that is patriarchal and it's man have easy access to all these rights. He talks all the stuff. He says like women have had to kind of deceive guys in order to navigate the system and have some type of rights and power and to grow to have that. Which I mean, even when I think about career and working wise, I think of people like my dad and his generation who kind of had to like assimilate themselves in order to be in the culture. They kind of had to deceive the people they are with of like the black side of themselves and the black community themselves to present this white side of themselves in order to succeed there. Yeah. Because their black selves weren't really welcomed in the working space they were in that was predominantly white. Yeah. That just made me think of that as an example. Yeah. But that's basically how he talks about deception is the weak. And his language, those in the margins, the disinherited, use that to survive.
Yeah. I even think when bringing up this topic of women, I think I've I know that I've done that so many times to get ahead in careers.
You're talking about that.
Is like present something like I literally remember in a previous church space that it was actually Family Harvest Church. I remember so many times that I would come up with an idea for a solution, present it to my superior, but present it in a way where they thought it was their idea. And then when they realized, oh, this is such a good idea, they felt that it was their idea and they ran with it and they were like celebrating it because they felt like I just came up with the solution when I knew it came from you. When I knew it was mine, but because I was dipped in bleach, dipped in white supremacy, like surrendered to assimilation at that season of my life, I like celebrated the fact that I helped them believe that they came up with this idea. It was like an accomplishment to do that. And that's just like the intersectionality of women versus men in a space and also Black women versus white women in a space. There's so many layers, and I was in that space for like 13 years. Heavy, hardcore, just about every day. So it's like really wild to think about the deception. It's like, I just need to trick you to believe in something in order for my safety, but also in order for my success.
Yeah, for your success. Yeah, and he says that too. He says in the book of like, when it comes down to like when the environment you're in is already unequal, and it's like you're weak, that person's strong, you don't have equal rights, and things aren't the same. You're thinking of like, well, what can I do that just allows me to achieve like some sense of victory? Right? How can I just have some sense of victory and like you said, success? And in order to do that, because the things aren't fair, we're not playing a fair game, then you kind of got to like trick and deceive the other person in order to get ahead, in order to flourish. I mean, I've seen this in my own life for sure. Multiple times, even like coming out of the job I was in. I think it's even still on my like Instagram title. I was told this as I was raising support. They said like the word like I said, use the word missionary, right, to get evangelical church to support you, because like when they hear the word like missionary, they're like, oh yeah, this person going over saving souls, all this stuff, is kind of what their idea of a missionary is. And so they're like, use that term to like raise support from the churches, kind of like, and in my head, in my heart, I'm like, man, I don't really see myself as their term of a missionary, but kind of just tell them I'm that, so that they will support me and give me money, kind of deceiving them in a way. And it's like stuff like that, like me raising support and money, that's my living, that's my finances and stuff. And so it's literally like this deception thing for allowing me to survive and to live, that kind of feel. We also did that. So if you're on Patreon and you've been for a while, you also know about this documentary project that I still plan to do. It's just on hold right now due to funding challenges. But this was one of the things that I did. So we created a website. We created a presentation deck to pitch to people that could potentially help us fund this project. And so because I also knew that I was going to be asking more spaces that were white ran, because these spaces have money, but also spaces that are about justice work, but they really don't know what that actually means. I would use language in the pitch deck about reconciliation. And in a lot of white spaces, I feel like that word resonates with them because they want to reconcile. They know that BIPOC and white people need to come together, and that is how they view that word. But people, they enjoy the word reconciliation. They enjoy that word, like so much. Unity and all that. We also know that to have reconciliation, actually, Adam Thomason brought this up. He actually asked me, so this is cool, just to even like share the story in line of this chapter. When I showed him the pitch deck because it was potential that he and his production crew would be able to help us with this project. And he was like, why did you use that word reconciliation? Because of what I know of you and have seen of you, you don't seem like that's the word that you're he noticed it. He called it out. Because the word reconciliation, and I watched this in another video he did, it means to reconcile. It means to give an account of every single dollar that's in your register, so to speak. So when you're talking about reconciliation,
BIPOC people with white people. It means to give an account of every single disparity, every single discrepancy, every single injustice.
Yeah.
We can't get to reconcile those things without
Unless
giving an
we,
account.
like, give an account.
That's something these white evangelical spaces don't resonate with that. But because I understand how they currently view the word in society, right? It's like the way that I'm trying to get funding for this project is to use language that makes sense to them for the purpose of doing this project, which is all about white supremacy and tearing it down.
Which, like, even your example even shows, and Howard Thurman says this too. He says it briefly because, again, throughout this book, he pays more attention on the those being oppressed than the oppressors. He pays more attention and focuses more on the victims, the disinherited, rather than he does on the oppressive systems, which is, like, interesting. Yeah. But he does hint, and he does say something small on saying that the oppressors use deception as well. Yeah. And like you said, that's just an example. It's like they use the word reconciliation, but then they don't actually give an account of all the things. And so they're actually deceiving in their own practice of the use of the word reconciliation. And so Howard Thurman says that too, that it's the oppressors and the strong and powerful, they use deception to create the world that they have to operate in, that the weak and strong have to operate in. Yeah. And they're able to create the world because they're the ones who have the power. They're the ones who are strong, right, in the world. So they're the ones who are creating the rules of the game. And the rules of the game, right, are deceptive a little bit. And this is even where he gets into talking about, because he doesn't call out any of this. He doesn't say any of this is, like, bad or negative. He just said, like, this is just the way things are. Even as he's talking about animals and saying animals, like, evolve in a way where in order to survive, they deceive their prey. Yeah. Or their predator. They deceive their predators in order to survive. And so it's kind of just like a natural thing, right, that we do. And so he doesn't really call it out as bad. Yeah. But he then kind of, like, questions it and says, like, it should be questioned, though, because then we get into the problem of morality. And he was like, is it a moral thing, right, to lie to others? Because when you're deceiving others, you're not being truly honest. And so he says then, like, this is like a moral problem that we have. And kind of then it wants us to think deeply about it that way, of, like, questioning our own morality of what we know to be good and true, living that out instead of living a lie or living a life that's telling lies and deceiving people to get ahead or to move around and survive. Yeah. So, like, man, is that a moral thing to do?
It's, go ahead, babe.
And, like, and so he that's kind of the question he proposes and where he goes in talking about morality, which he says a lot of good stuff, which I'll get to, I think, in a moment too, about all of that. But in terms of talking about the oppressors also deceiving people, that they, and Anitha Butler are saying, Anitha Butler is a professor in Penn State, religious studies, and she's an amazing Black woman who had written a book on white evangelicalism and its impact in America. And in a podcast with a Fuller professor, she kind of talks about, in her book, she talks about this term she uses called politic morality, how white evangelicals kind of, like, say they present themselves as being moral in society, which is a really powerful thought, because I do think Christianity and the church still today does have a really big moral impact in our country. Yeah. Like, it kind of tells our country, like, what is moral, what's not moral. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. I think religion in general, but specifically the Christian church, has a big impact. I think things probably got a little blurry with Trump, but it still has a impact in society of, like, them saying, like, abortion's wrong. We need to uphold this moral. Them even when it was big in the time when they were saying, like, man, we can't allow LGBTQ marriage, all that stuff, that's immoral. Like, they just, like, they've mixed the morality, right, with politics to push different initiatives and stuff. And she, in her book, says, like, they use all this stuff to present themselves as being moral and fighting for morality, but they actually use it as a shield, right, to hide from their biggest sin in this country, which was slavery, which was which people to slave, which was, like, the biggest sin and the biggest thing in this country that white evangelicals need to repent from. That they use this other stuff, saying that they're moral, to hide from that.
Yeah.
Just deceiving, right, themselves and deceiving other people, which is like what I say white psychosis is, them living in their own world.
Yeah.
To deceive other people, to say like, man, that's not a moral issue we really need to worry about, slavery, but the moral issues we need to worry about is like abortion and LGBTQ stuff and all that stuff is the things that they choose to focus on of what should be morally important.
Wow. I really like that concept of it being a shield to protect them from the actual root issue, which is causing all the other things. It's like, you know, it actually reminds me of a Facebook event that I jumped on during the summer of 2020. It was led by Native people. It was a Native Tea Party type group. You did that, and it was all about decolonizing, actually. And I was the only Black woman. Everyone else was Native American, which I really valued that experience. Because it was interesting to be a minority in a place where it wasn't white people. You know what I mean? But also I am one of you, but in a different context, in a different story. But we also have mutual respect for each other's ancestry and lineage. But one of the things that she said, the leader of the group, was, don't be deceived. In politics, they want you to think that it's about this issue or that issue. Exactly. They're trying so hard to distract you about all these other things. But she named it as, especially being a Native American, this is so true. She was like, it truly is about land and power. It has always been about land and power, which is like the fruit, the expression of that is slavery. The expression of that is the abolition, or excuse me, not abolition, but when they got rid of Native people, extermination of people groups, because it was always about land and power, right? So it's like, wow, that is really powerful. And it was really powerful to hear it from a Native American woman, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it reminds me in the chapter 1 of this book, again, when it was a Korean lady who, in some academic conference Howard Thurman was at, who was to speak on American education. And she's like, the only thing I have to talk about is the Japanese occupation and them oppressing Koreans. She was like, let's not distract from the main point, from what the main thing is. Like we don't need to distract. Like, I'm here to talk about what matters. And I'm not going to talk about American education just to have fun to give fun thoughts and all that stuff. Like, no, I want to talk about what matters and what's real. And that's the enslavement of my people and the Japanese occupation for the Koreans at that time.
Were you going to say something else?
No.
So in light of that, I actually made this note because I felt like what he said here was like a reflection of what Trumpism is, and what Trump is actually creating in his followers and following is this white psychosis, essentially. And this, the ideology thought process of people that followed Trump. Someone coined it like Trumpism, which is, I think, really explained in this paragraph on my ebook. It's page 41, where Howard Thurman says, the penalty of deception is to become a deception with all sense of moral discrimination vitiated, I believe is the word. A man who lies habitually becomes a lie, and it is increasingly impossible for him to know when he is lying and when he is not. In other words, the moral mercury of life is reduced to zero, where you are unable to now decipher between what is true and what is not. Which I think is really wild and interesting to see the progression of thought process in people that adhere to Trumpism, because over time, his lies become increasingly deceitful, and it becomes increasingly hard to decipher now what is true and what is false, what is acceptable and unacceptable. Like, even I watched a video on Instagram, which I posted on my stories today. Somebody had taken this clip from a recent, I think, rally that he was doing, and he had said it, if I get elected in 2024, you better believe that I'm going to do right by those who participated in the insurrection and deliver them out of their oppression or take them out of jail, was literally what he was saying to his followers. And I'm like, the fact that you believe that that is morally right to take them out of jail who participated in an insurrection said by the leader who initiated the insurrection. And the fact that there are people that adhere to Trumpism that don't even decipher that that is actually wrong is like mind-boggling to me, which is so about like the deception that Howard Thurman is talking about, where you no longer can decipher, is this right or is this wrong? Is this right or is this wrong? Like that's, you become the lie. And I think that's what's even happened to Trump, is that he's been lying so long that he doesn't even have a moral compass anymore.
Well, that's my thought that I was wanting to tweet, was like, when you begin to compromise your morality, then that's when you begin to fall into believing the lie and believing the deception that you've been holding and telling. You just kind of, like you said, you become the lie. Yes. And that's what happens when you begin to compromise your morality, which like, I don't want to, because I think Howard Thurman, like in his book, he says all this stuff and he's like, how does this impact, or how should those who are oppressed navigate with all of this, right? And so I don't want to spend too much time focused on the oppressors. And the oppressive systems, but to focus on those who are being oppressed and how they navigate it all. But there's so much that could be said to both ends, and so this could be said to both ends. But what's really cool when he goes to that morality section, see if I can find it, when he goes there. I don't know if you ever heard that part in Scripture where Jesus says, Jesus is saying that those who blaspheme the Holy Spirit, like that's the worst sin or something. What is it? Well, those who blaspheme their words.
Unpardonable.
Unpardonable. Yeah. He says unpardonable sin, which like people read that and people always never quite understand what Jesus is really saying there, which it is a tricky thing. But Howard Thurman gives his kind of take on it, which I think is really crazy. And good. I wanna find it specifically and not by word. And so, so he talks about this is an ethical issue, this like issue of like deception and all that stuff. Like it's not an academic issue. He says it's like a moral and ethic type issue. And even when we talk about like if you yourself like are succumbing to the lie as the oppressed person, if you decide to like, hey, I'm gonna become this thing I'm lying about so I can get ahead, and I'm gonna become this thing I'm deceiving people about so I can survive and all that stuff. He's like, man, you're kind of like fighting against yourself when you do that, and you're fighting against like the actual true issue, just alleviating that for your true freedom. So you're kind of fighting against that. And so before Jesus says that, when he talks about blaspheming the Holy Spirit, it's when the Pharisees, Jesus is like, heals some folks and cast out demons. And they tell Jesus like, man, it's by the power of Satan. It's by the power of the demons you're casting out these demons. And Jesus is like, that doesn't make any sense. He's like, a house standing against itself, it can't stand. It's like, why would the prince of demons be casting out demons? Like, that's against its mission. But then he says, and like this, it's really like a crazy thought. It's like just like interesting again why Howard Thurman thinks this way. It's like, ooh, this is really interesting interpretation of what Jesus is saying. And so he said that that casting out devils by the power of the devil is like, that can't be the case. And then that's when he says after that, those who blaspheme the Holy Spirit, it's unpardonable sin. Basically saying like those who are like deceiving themselves, saying what is bad is actually saying what is good. The Holy Spirit is bad, which they saw Jesus at that time is bad, is actually blaspheming the Holy Spirit, is this unpardonable sin, Jesus says. And so basically what Jesus is saying through all that, Howard Thurman says, is that it's when you get confused on the morality of what is good and what's bad. So Jesus is like, you guys are calling me bad, casting out these demons. It's actually bad. I'm actually casting out bad stuff. He's just like, when you guys get confused on this morality, on what's good and bad, on the ways to live, he's like, that's when you've like lost yourself. He's like, that's this unpardonable sin. He's like, you've lost yourself because you've ended up, you've deceived yourself so much on what's good and what's bad. You don't even know how to operate. You don't even know how to live. You're living in what we call like this white psychosis, living in your own world.
Wow.
And he's like, that's what unpardonable sin is.
Yeah.
Which is like,
That's
isn't
wild.
that crazy? Like, you don't hear that passage talked about that way
you
in
don't.
church, which is super interesting. I'd like to flesh out my thoughts more on it.
Yeah.
But in that concept of morality, of then like deciding, okay, like what is good, like what is bad, what is the way to operate in living a life that's honest and sincere, or a life that's deceptive, and all of that stuff. He kind of says without saying, like, man, it's clear that the way to go is to be living a life that's sincere, that's without deception, that's without hypocrisy, to live a life that's like honest. And then he goes on to talk about all of the positive ramifications that kind of come from doing that and being and living that way.
Yeah. Actually, on that note, I want to read something else that he says that I highlighted on page 44 of my ebook. He says, I have in my possession a copy of a letter from Mahatma Gandhi to Muriel Lester. The letter says in part, speak the truth without fear and without exception, and see everyone whose work is related to your purpose. You are in God's work, so you need not fear man's scorn. If they listen to your requests and grant them, you will be satisfied. If they reject them, then you must make their rejection your strength. Then Howard Thurman goes on to say, the acceptance of this alternative is to be simply, directly truthful, whatever may be the cost in life, limb, or security. For the individual who accepts this, there may be quick and speedy judgment with attendant loss. But if the number increases and the movement spreads, the vindication of the truth would follow in the wake. There must always be the confidence that the effect of truthfulness can be realized in the mind of the oppressor as well as the oppressed.
Yeah.
There is no substitute for such a faith.
Yeah.
That's so well put.
Right?
Like, that's it. Truth telling, right? Like that in this world and in this like thought of deception, in this whole chapter, he beckons us to tell the truth, to be fully sincere, to be truly who we are, and show up in the spaces truly as we are, to almost like, he says it in such a way, right? So he's not like shaming you if you are a minority assimilated in a space trying to survive.
Because he gets it. He says, like, that's just the way things are.
That's the way things are. But he also, in the same breath, I feel like, that holds the tension of, in the same breath, I beckon you to be a truth teller, because it is the truth that comes out of your mouth that you as the oppressor and others who are oppressed and those who are doing the oppression can hear those words. And in that process, it leads to liberation. It leads to freedom. It leads to change. And that is one thing that both oppressed people and oppressors can hear is truth, is to show up in spaces as truth tellers and to be sincere, truly sincere. So I really like the way he broke that down.
No, I love that too. And I mean, I like even another point he says to live that way and living in this sincere way is in the relation with God, right? And that's part of the morality aspect he has too. Right, because if you're a believer, you're a Christian, or even if you're spiritual at all, you do believe there's some higher power of God that is all moral, right? That is morally good. And so he's like, you can maybe fool and deceive the other person. Right? You may even be able to fool and deceive yourself. But he says, like, you can't deceive God. He's like, God sees it all. He's everywhere. Like, he knows your inner thoughts, your inner being. And he's like, you can't deceive God on what you really. And then he talks about how the scripture, right, and in the story before the Good Samaritan, was that Luke 10, where basically like loving God and loving your neighbor, right, is the same thing. He was like, loving God, loving neighbor is like the same thing. And so it's like you deceiving this person is your attempt, right, to deceive God, right, as well. And so it kind of like puts it all as like to live this way where you're open. And this is why I kind of like the word sincere, and I like the way how you use it a little bit even more than truth-telling, because sincere to me is kind of like this word. Well, first, I think like the Google definition of it that I like is without hypocrisy, just without deception.
Yeah.
Is the word. But sincere is kind of just like, man, this is just my what I'm thinking and feeling now in this moment.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's right. I don't know if it's true completely, but this is just like the reality of what's going on in my mind and my heart, right? I think that's why I like sincere a little bit more than truth telling. And for me, at least in my head, because it's like, man, this may not even be fully true, the things that I'm thinking or feeling, but it's just where I'm at. Yeah. And it's true to me in this moment. That's what makes it true, is that it's true to you in this moment, but it may not be over factually true, right? Yeah. And so it's like his call is to be overwhelmingly sincere, because God, you can try to like, and this is where it's like the LGBTQ discussion is like really interesting, is because like they can try to even deceive themselves, but God knows who they are. God knows their being and their sexual identity. Like God knows that. Yeah. And it's like God wants you to be fully sincere and just be you and saying that, and to be you in how you relate to other people. This is all very similar to the concept and idea of relinquishing the false self. Yeah. Because when you are deceiving others, then you become this false self, and you become the lie.
Meaning, if someone identifies as queer, but they're trying to identify as straight, they're not being fully sincerely themselves. Yeah. And it's also, the false self is also like this kind of, it is this kind of like Christian monk term. Yeah. And then it's also a kind of like a psychology term and mental health term too, of like kind of this living our false selves just basically means we're not being really real with others. We're like hiding part of ourselves with others, and even with ourselves we're doing that. And so his concept of overwhelmingly sincere kind of like throws that away, the false self away, and allows you to be the person that God sees and God already knows, because he's like, he knows you're going to be, he knows your thoughts. Yeah. It's just, you're the person that now needs to live that out by being sincere. Yeah. And then the cool ramification, I feel like, that he says that when you do that, when you live that sincere life, the system that the oppressors had created, right, allowed them to be strong and allowed you to be in this weak position. So things aren't equal. Yeah. But when he says, when you do this thing where you live a sincere life, you're just real with yourself, your thoughts and your feelings, he says, you then put the oppressors down and you make things equal. Like they have to lose their rating. Wow. Like the power that they have is like you're able to survive and navigate it by deceiving. Wow. But when you choose to be sincere, they now relinquish that power that they had over you, and you now are talking with each other on equal terms. That is the most and that you're now isn't it crazy? It's really good that you're now relating to this person on equal terms. Wow. When you're sincere, because you're not saying like, oh, I got to hide myself from you because you have this power. And which is his whole point that he got at in the last chapter, when he talked about fear, is he was like, you're God's children. You have dignity. You have value. Yeah. And when you live a sincere life, it shows yourself that, oh, I do have dignity. I do have value. What I do feel, what I do think, what actually is happening to me, and how I'm interpreting what is happening to me is real and is my experience. And I'm able to talk about it because I have dignity. I have value. Yeah. What I feel and what I think matters. Yeah. Right? And when you get there, then you're able to be sincere with other people. Yeah. So a few things that are stirring in me. One, when I hear you say you like the word sincere more than truth-telling, I love that, and I love that for you. And I'm like reflecting on why is truth-telling the word that I gravitate towards? And I like the word truth-teller because Obani actually said it in my interview with her, is like, I'm not going to lie anymore. Yeah. It's kind of like what you're saying. It's like the same thing, but slightly different. Yeah. Because when you've been lying about what it is like to be a Black woman in America, because you are in whatever space you are and you're trying to protect yourself from violence and you're living whatever it is, right? Not saying that that's bad or wrong or however you're showing up at that space and that time, you are, one, trying to protect yourself. But when you're a truth teller, you're like, I'm not going to lie about what it is like for me to live in this world anymore. I'm going to be fully sincere, fully who I am. And I'm not going to just deceive you and make you believe that it's not really true anymore. So it's like, but what I also hear you saying when you say you love the word sincere, and as you even explained it, it's almost like presenting yourself fully in your humanity in real time is how what your description was received by me. It's like, I'm just trying to show
Which
up.
I think that's a great way to say it.
I'm presenting my humanity fully in real time. And that's what it is for me in sincerity.
And I think that sums it up really well in the way that you said it, because his point in all these chapters and what he gets towards at the end is, again, like trying to reflect and for us to grasp the religion of Jesus. Right? Like, what is the religion of Jesus? And so for you to even say that Jesus was a person, and his Howard Thurman's right towards the end, he talks about how Jesus lived a sincere life and how he adopted that ethic of living sincere before God. Was like, I'm just going to put my full humanity, my full self in front, which is like, that's what Jesus did. But when people talk about Jesus, we talk more about his divinity, him being God, him being this, but it's like Jesus like adopted more of his humanity and took close more of his humanity than he did his divinity, being God in the flesh.
My other last thought and a reflection on everything you just said was, I think that thought is probably one of the most powerful things that you Howard Thurman, this book is giving language for me about, is the idea of that relinquishing control and power. There is already the strong and the weak. White people are in the strong category. BIPOC people are in the weak category. When we assimilate, when we surrender to assimilation, when we are deceitful and aren't being true about what our lived experience is like in the world, what it is like to show up as a weak among the strong, when we do that, we keep giving them power over us. But the moment we are truthful about our lived experience, the moment we actually tell the truth, show up fully presently in our humanity in real time, we become on equal playing fields, because now the oppressors have to deal with the truth of our lived experience. And now we are saying, you are not stronger than I am. I am equal to you. And what it is like for me what it is like for me to be equal to you is for me to tell the truth about what it is like for me to be alive in a lived experience and context with you in real time. And I just think that is so powerful, which is why it is so liberating to be truthful and to be fully sincere, because you like, you don't give them control over you anymore. And that's why it's so liberating for queer people to come out, because I'm no longer giving you control over what you're telling me to be in my identity, or how you think I should show up in the world, or even patriarchy, misogyny. I'm no longer going to give you control over what it's like to be a woman. Like, I'm not going to give you control over me as a man, as a woman. You know what I mean? So it's just really wild to me, which is why like Jesus's mission is so powerful, because he loves us from the vantage point of our lived experience. And Jesus's mission is so powerful because he's constantly liberating people in the margins, people that are pushed out. He's constantly liberating the weak among the strong, and he's calling the strong to listen to the truth of the weak, you know? And so I think that's what makes what we do and the work of what we do so exciting too, because I'm like, oh wow, like this is the work of Jesus, you know, like this is the Jesus that people that I've been discipled by have been quiet about. And I think, just to use the word deceitful because it's in this chapter, in the context of this, pastors that have been deceitful about who Jesus actually is are also quiet about the truth, and then keep the power dynamics at play.
They use deception as well.
Oh my gosh. His point. So I really like the way that you put that. It's really helpful.
And I think that's basically what his whole book, a lot of chapters are about, at least the first two, fear and deception, and some of the next will be like that too. It's basically him. And again, he's writing this book really speaking to the weak, to the oppressed, to BIPOC in society, and basically telling them, get your power back. That's basically like what each chapter is back.
Baby, get your power back.
He's like, get your, like,
yes.
They've allowed you to think that they have all this power.
Yes.
That they're the ones who are like, he's basically like, get your power back.
Wow.
And that like begins, right, by getting your dignity and how you operate in the world.
Yes.
And that's basically kind of his point in every single chapter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love
At least that's what I've gathered so far.
Yeah, same. Oh, man. Well, this has been another episode of Book Club, Jesus and the Disinherited by Howard Thurman.
So good.
With Kendall and Erin Dooley, the Dooley Love duo. So we love you guys. Thanks for reading along. We're going to figure out how to have like a group discussion around this. There's been some people that have shown interest in like talking about it in real time. It's a little bit hard because our availability to do these are during the day, which is when people are also working. But I would love to have like, maybe just a live convo with everybody. So we'll figure that out and schedule something and just see how we can make that happen.
That would be nice.
But yeah, anyways, thank you guys for joining, being a part of this, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.